Glenn Greenwald is the doyen of journalism, author, columnist, host of System Update, founder of The Intercept, and co-founder of Freedom of the Press. He's a great man, and I'm very honoured to welcome him for the first time, I think, onto the mother of all talk shows. Glenn, thanks for joining us. So I started by saying, will he, won't he, will he, won't he, will he join the dance? Will Donald Trump join this war, as he earlier seemed to make certain that he would?
He himself today, and first of all, thank you for those very kind words, George. I was confused because I know I've talked to you before in this setting, and I realized it's because you've been on my show. So I'm happy to make my debut appearance on yours. Hope it won't be the last. You know, as Trump himself said this morning, and I think he's right, nobody knows what he's going to do. He's saying, you know, I could join the war. I couldn't join the war. At this point, if I were a betting man and I were forced to speculate, my guess is that all signals that have been sent in terms of Trump's rhetoric, in terms of his posture, in terms of the actions of the U.S. government and other people who are close to Trump and what they're telling me, it seems very likely, very, very likely that he intends to have the U.S. military join with the Israelis in some form to attack Iran. I think Trump is displaying this very disturbing hubris, almost like an intoxication, where he's inebriated from the power he feels about how he can single-handedly destroy or kill. A lot of deranged comments coming from him that suggest that he very much is kind of connected to and being motivated by and almost excited and aroused by his capacity to wage war and destroy and the power that's in his hands to do that. So it looks as though, if I had to bet, that it's more likely than not that the U.S. military will become more involved, directly involved, visibly involved than it already is.
It makes you pine for a return of the auto pen, almost. Because if this is human control of events, then the sword is being wielded by a rather unstable individual. Some of the language that he's using on Truth Social is, as you say, unhinged, deranged. Is there anyone, any grown-ups in the cabinet room or amongst the top brass who can take his phone away and take his finger off the trigger?
I think, you know, a lot of people, I think you might have been one of them, I certainly was, understood that one of the reasons to be potentially optimistic about the election of Trump as opposed to Kamala Harris, given that those were the only two choices, is that Trump really did have this potential to be what Seymour Hersh called a circuit breaker, somebody who would actually come in and put a stop to and kind of break and crush what had been the bipartisan foreign policy dogma of imperialism and militarism that dominated Washington for so long. And we know for certain that had Joe Biden or Kamala Harris been reelected or elected in the case of Kamala Harris, there's zero chance that anything would have changed. They would have continued to be as subservient to Israel as they've always been. It's hard to imagine them standing up in any way, whereas I think Trump actually has the ability. He doesn't care about anyone really but himself and his own power. And so I think, and also there are people in his administration who are far more anti-interventionist, far more opposed to this kind of militarism than anyone that would have taken an important position in a Biden administration 2.0 or a Kamala administration as well. There are people in high levels of position and authority inside the Trump administration who are very much opposed to involving the U.S. in any way, even to the extent we've already been involved, and are counseling him and urging him not to do so. I mean, you saw Tulsi Gabbard, who he handpicked to be the director of national intelligence, go before the Senate openly and say the consensus of our analysis of our intelligence is that Khomeini has done nothing. The Iranians have done nothing to change the fact that they are not actively pursuing a nuclear weapon. She recorded a video a few days ago warning of the dangers of nuclear war and war between nuclear powers that seemed very much to suggest that she was concerned. You definitely have people in his orbit, more so than you would have had with Kamala, who are encouraging him to avoid this. But I think one of the things that Trump was determined to do in his second term that he rightly felt didn't happen in the first term was to make sure that he alone made decisions, that he wasn't surrounded by people who were sabotaging him or trying undemocratically to subvert what he was wanting to do. And unfortunately, that is how they built this administration, with absolute, complete loyalty being the sole real requirement. Everyone knows that that's what they have to do. And that's what concerns me, is that Trump is pretty much alone to make whatever decision he wants. And whether he's watching Fox News and hears something, or talks to Netanyahu or Marco Rubio and gets convinced by something, that's what's going to happen. And that's why it's hard to predict and also pretty alarming.
Well, Oscar Wilde described someone once as bearing the impression, like a sofa, of the last person to sit on them. And one gets the impression that on Air Force One, just coming back from Europe overnight, he was definitely on the phone to the wrong kind of people. We'll come back to the war in a minute, but it's definitely splitting the MAGA ranks. I'm following avidly the school of thought of the likes of Steve Bannon and the likes of Tucker Carlson, the doyen of broadcast journalism, who was summarily executed, so to speak, by Donald Trump in the most cutting possible way just the other day, despite everything that Carlson had done for him. So if he's not listening to them, and he is listening to the wrong people, I think we've reason to be pessimistic, as both you and I seem to be.
Yeah, the fact that he turned around and publicly mocked Tucker Carlson, not only mocked him, but tried to humiliate him by saying he's not even on television, which is ironic since Trump himself said the mainstream media is dead, that podcasting and alternative media and independent media is where things are happening. That's a major part of his campaign strategy. But now he seems to be saying, if you're not appearing on my television screen on cable news, you don't really have a relevant voice. That is deeply concerning, because I know Tucker and Trump have a very close personal relationship. Tucker has been nothing but publicly effusive about Trump's character, about supporting Trump. He campaigned for Trump. He gave speeches for Trump. So I think what Trump was doing there was, number one, showing how invested he is in the idea of involving the U.S. in this war, that he became so angry instantaneously at Tucker for questioning it that he was willing to humiliate one of his closest and most important supporters. But also he was sending a signal, more importantly, to all the other influencers and podcasters and activists who rely upon good standing in MAGA or access to the White House, that the minute you question me, you will be summarily dismissed. If I can do this to Tucker Carlson, as I just did, think of what I can do to you. And that is this kind of very closed, authoritarian, dissent-free bubble that Trump seems to be determined to create around himself. And I'll tell you, George, what really bothered me and disturbs me the most is that email, that text that Mike Huckabee, who, as you know, is a adherent to end times, messianic Christianity. It's so ironic that they're constantly saying we have to be worried about Iran because they believe in a messianic form of Islam, when there is no more messianic foreign policy at this moment in the United States, because of people like Mike Huckabee, who believe that defending the Israeli government is the prerequisite to having Jesus return to earth and consign all non-believers, including pretty much every Jew, to hell. That's a major part of U.S. Influence and support for the U.S. And Mike Huckabee was basically telling Trump, the reason God spared you in Butler, Pennsylvania, and the reason God chose you for this moment is because he wants you to be as consequential a figure as Harry Truman was in 1945. And of course, the only thing that Harry Truman did in 1945 that made him so consequential was the unleashing of 2 nuclear bombs on Japan, combined with the demand of unconditional surrender. And not only did Trump go and post that text as though he believes in it and is inspired by it and moved by it, right immediately after is when he started demanding, quote unquote, unconditional render from the Iranians. So if that's the mindset in which he's currently operating, and it seems to be that he is, I can't think of anything more alarming than that. I guess the only word of optimism I'd offer is that Trump likes to troll, even in these kind of situations, likes to provoke, likes to make people think he's going to do something, and then likes to do something else. So again, he's very hard to predict, but all the signs, I think, are disturbing.
In that case, maybe I'm, as George Bush might put it, misunderestimating what's about to happen. I predicted a Moab, but maybe we should be thinking about the potential of a tactical nuclear strike on the mountains that under which the Iranian nuclear facilities are based. Is it conceivable that Donald Trump could nuke Iran?
I don't want to be too alarmist on the one hand, but on the other, when you're dealing with a situation this grave, this serious, this consequential for the planet, for the humanity, I think it's irresponsible not to pay attention to the worst case scenario, especially when the person in charge is clearly flirting with and trifling with that on purpose. I mean, one of the things, remember, that he did was after Israel suggested that everybody who lives in Tehran should evacuate, Trump went on to True Social at 2 a.m. Baghdad, Tehran time, and said that everyone who lives in Tehran should immediately evacuate. That's 15 million people at 2 a.m. trying to stir this panic. Now, if this war is about destroying Iran's nuclear capabilities and nuclear facilities, why would they need to evacuate Tehran when there are no nuclear facilities in Tehran? We all know where they are, at least mostly where they are, and they're outside of Tehran, in the mountains in central Iran, some in the east, a couple in the west. So that was at least designed to, let's say, put it as generously and optimistically as possible, induce panic in the brains and minds and hearts of 16 million Iranian people. And when you have Trump posting something like, you have the chance to be as consequential as what Harry Truman did, and I guarantee you there are people around him telling you this is your Churchill moment. You have to decide if you're Churchill or Chamberlain. I know in the UK, unfortunately, that's what contaminated the U.S. with this pathology. That's the only thing through which everything is understood. Are you Churchill, meaning are you for whatever latest war we're telling you? Or are you Chamberlain, meaning the coward that's too afraid to send other people to wars? That's the way that neocons have created U.S. discourse. And they're trying to tell Trump, this is your moment to be Churchill. And of course, the way that war ended again was through the use of nuclear weapons, which Trump is openly discussing. So I'm not ready to say that Trump is going to do that, is actively contemplating it. But when you think about Trump's personality and the thing that he hates most, which is appearing to be weak or humiliated, and you have the Ayatollahs scoffing at him, as you just pointed out, saying, I don't care about your threats to kill me. That's not going to change my mind. That is the sort of thing that can psychologically affect Trump, that can make him subject to the manipulation of others. And the kind of worst case scenario, which isn't just dropping the MOAB on a nuclear facility where very few people live, but dropping a worse weapon still in a densely populated area, at least becomes a possibility.
As you're talking there, my mind was flashing back to, I thought, the rather overblown movie, The Apprentice, Ali Abbasi's movie, about the early Donald Trump and the sinister figure of Roy Conn, possibly the most serpent-like human being that ever walked in the United States. And I'm thinking that Trump is kind of morphing into Roy Conn.
Well, Roy Conn was a hero and a father figure to Donald Trump, as you all know, not just from that film, but from basic history. He really admired Roy Conn and everything he talks about, the way he speaks about people with admiration only if they're strong and tough. What he means by strong and tough is the kind of Machiavellian, amoral, sort of limitless will to power that Roy Conn believed he embodied, that a lot of people were very intimidated by Roy Conn, were afraid of him, and that's what he very much cultivated. That's clearly what Trump has always sought to portray as well. I mean, he talks about Xi, even talks about Maduro, with a certain Putin, with a certain kind of admiration because of how strong they are, meaning they'll do anything to remain in power in his mind. That to him is the highest value, and that's what he wants to embody, and that's what makes the situation so dangerous. And I, would point out as well that although I'm not necessarily opposed to having people in their late 70s and 80s in high positions of government power, I do think that one of the risks is that people do start to change how they think about life and the world as they get closer to the time when human beings generally die. And that means caring a lot more about what your legacy is or how history will think about you, and a lot less about the effects for everybody else who has to live on the planet once you're gone. And I think Trump is entering that phase as well. And that too is very alarming.
Now, there's a pin drop silence from the top Democrats. But there does seem to be a bit of a congressional revolt going on. Roy Conn and Thomas Massie have introduced a bipartisan bill into the House which asserts the plain constitutional truth that President Trump does not have the power to make this war. There is no imminent threat to the United States from Iran. It would be a grossly unconstitutional act simply by fiat to do any of the things you and I have just been discussing. Does that motion have any chance of passing? Indeed, are there enough Republicans that would be ready to side with enough Democrats to pass this?
I really don't think so. I believe me, I'm looking for anything to be optimistic about as well, and that's one of the things I would love to grab on. You know, you're the last person I need to recount the history of the Iraq War to, but for people who weren't young enough, who were not old enough to have lived through it or forgot, in 2002, George Bush and Dick Cheney took the position that we're allowed to invade Iraq, you know, a ground invasion on the other side of the world without getting congressional approval for whatever reason. And Congress was basically left begging, please, just let us vote, let us weigh in, let us have a vote. And it was only once the Congress basically guaranteed that they were going to vote in favor of the war. And they basically told Bush, look, your war will be stronger if we get to vote for it and show everybody that it's not just you, but us as well, including Democrats behind it. They kind of gave permission to vote. Okay, you can vote on this as long as you guarantee that the vote is going to be yes. And of course, overwhelmingly by a bipartisan majority, it was yes. So what is happening now is, you know, you have senior Democrats. Chuck Schumer, 3 weeks ago, the senior Democrat in Washington, a longtime loyalist of Israel, was mocking Trump as being too soft for trying to negotiate with Iran, was mocking him for being a quote unquote chicken for trying to arrange a diplomatic resolution to deal with the Iranians, daring him to go to war. And since this war started, Schumer has made clear he's on the side of Israel as always. Same with Hakeem Jeffries, the senior Democrat in the House. Is it possible that a procedural vote might be supported where Congress says we should vote on this if we're really going to go to war with Iran? I don't think so, but maybe. But the only way that would happen is if AIPAC and Israel are assured in advance that that vote is going to go in their favor. So even if that were to happen, I think it would be at most the kind of symbolic procedural step that actually ends up fortifying the U.S. attempt to go to war with Iran rather than impeding it by saying, oh, look, the people and their representatives in Congress are behind you.
At this point, it's clear, isn't it, that it's Israel first, not America first, even with the Trumpites, who made their whole insurrectionary move against the old guard of the Republicans on that basis, putting America first. Is putting America first now very last decade, last year?
Unfortunately, putting America first or making America great again or America first, you know, at least in the modern iteration of how Donald Trump presented it, has always had a gigantic, glaring Israel exception. I mean, Trump's first term, he boasted about how he would give his primary funders, Sheldon and Miriam Adelson, you know, Miriam Adelson being the multi-billionaire who is Israeli, became an American citizen late in life, but served in the IDF. They only cared about Israel. Trump boasted that nobody visited him more in the White House than Sheldon and Miriam Adelson, and every time they went, they demanded more things for Israel. He not only gave them everything, but he even gave them more. He said, they didn't even ask me for the Golan Heights, and I gave Israel the Golan Heights. And during the campaign, he would give speeches in front of Miriam Adelson, who gave him $100 million, and not just her, but plenty of other pro-Israel billionaires as well, where he would give speeches and he would say, we're going to make Israel great again, and we're going to make the U.S. great again. And I think that's the reason he got so angry at Tucker Carlson and why he's become so defensive, because, of course, George, there's a gigantic, irreconcilable contradiction between saying, on the one hand, you want to put America first, and on the other, continuously pursuing policies and fighting wars that are in the interests of this foreign country and have absolutely no effect on your own citizens other than harming their economic security and even their physical security. And yet we continue to do that because the Israel lobby is stronger than ever. That is the reality, not just of the United States, but also Donald Trump. And it's hard to imagine seeing an American president, even if he wanted, refusing to go to war for Israel the minute that Israel demands it.